Under the canopy of a sprawling oak tree, the Holloway house stood like a beacon of suburban perfection. Nestled at the end of Sycamore Lane, the two-story home with its perfectly trimmed hedges and vibrant flower beds was the envy of the neighborhood. The scent of fresh-cut grass mingled with the faint aroma of barbecue smoke from a nearby yard, completing the postcard-like serenity. To anyone passing by, the Holloways were the kind of family that Christmas cards were modeled after: Ethan, the steady and reliable engineer; Julie, the doting wife and mother; and Ava, their 7-year-old daughter with strawberry blonde pigtails and a toothy smile that could charm even the grumpiest neighbor. But beneath the polished veneer, the foundations of this idyllic family were beginning to shift. Ethan Holloway had always been a man of precision. He approached life with the same analytical mind he brought to his work designing skyscrapers and bridges. His dedication to problem-solving, coupled with an unwavering sense of responsibility, made him a reliable partner and father. Julie often teased that he could fix anything, from a squeaky door hinge to a busted dishwasher, without batting an eye. "You're my knight in a hard hat," she'd say, laughing, and he'd respond with a sheepish grin. Their life together had been one of predictable rhythms: shared morning coffee, family game nights, and lazy Sunday breakfasts. But over the past year, subtle changes began to creep into those rhythms, throwing Ethan's sense of normalcy into disarray. Julie had taken up yoga, which initially seemed harmless enough. She claimed it helped her unwind after the challenges of managing their household. Ethan had been supportive, even encouraging her to take time for herself. But her classes stretched later into the evening, her explanations growing vaguer. When he'd casually asked why her sessions ended so late, she'd waved him off. "The studio is crowded at normal hours. It's just easier this way." What began as a trickle of oddities soon became a steady stream. Julie started paying more attention to her appearance: new clothes, a different perfume, and an effort to wear makeup even when she wasn't leaving the house. She spent long stretches of time on her phone, giggling at texts she never mentioned. "Just the moms group," she'd say, her tone light and dismissive, but she'd turn the screen away when he approached. Ethan found himself grasping for explanations, but each one felt like an unsteady bridge over a chasm of doubt. The tipping point came late one evening. Ethan had stayed up working on blueprints for a client who wanted to build a modern eco-friendly office complex. The soft glow of his desk lamp illuminated the room as he sketched and calculated, lost in the satisfying flow of his work. Around midnight, he stepped out for a glass of water, expecting to find the house silent and still. Instead, he heard muffled sobbing coming from the bathroom. "Jules." His voice, heavy with concern, broke through the soft cries. "You okay in there?" There was a long pause before the door creaked open. Julie stood before him, her eyes red and swollen, mascara smudged across her cheeks. She tried to smile, but it faltered. "Oh, it's nothing," she said, brushing past him like a shadow. "Hormones or something. Don't worry about it." Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, her words echoing in his ears. This was not the Julie he knew, the Julie who would spill every thought in her head the moment it crossed her mind. He wanted to ask more, to push for answers, but something in her demeanor stopped him. Instead, he returned to his office, the half-filled glass of water left forgotten on the kitchen counter. The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee brewing. Julie was already in the kitchen, flipping pancakes while Ava colored at the table. She greeted him with a sunny smile, as though the previous night hadn't happened. "Morning, sleepyhead," she chirped. "Coffee's on the counter. Pancakes will be ready in a minute." Ethan accepted the cup of coffee, but as he sipped it, his mind churned with questions. He watched her move about the kitchen, her laughter light and carefree, and wondered how she could mask her pain so effortlessly. Was it him? Had he been too absorbed in work, too inattentive as a husband? Or was there something else, something deeper, that she wasn't telling him? He told himself to let it go, to trust her. Trust was the foundation of marriage, after all, and without it, what were they? But even as he reassured himself, his mind replayed every odd interaction, every late-night yoga class, every muffled laugh behind the glow of her phone screen. It wasn't long before an opportunity arose to test his doubts. One evening, Julie left her phone on the kitchen counter as she tucked Ava into bed. Ethan sat at the table, staring at the device like it was a ticking bomb. A notification popped up, a text from a contact labeled Sarah Yoga. The message preview read, "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can we do it again?" Ethan's stomach twisted. His hands trembled as he reached for the phone, but just as his fingers brushed the screen, Julie's footsteps echoed down the stairs. He jerked back, pretending to scroll through his own emails as she entered the room. She picked up her phone, gave him a quick smile, and headed upstairs without a word. That night, Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as Julie slept beside him. Her breathing was steady, her face serene, and yet he felt as though he were lying next to a stranger. The weight of his suspicions pressed down on him like the steel beams he worked with daily. He had to know the truth. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's world became a balancing act. By day, he maintained the facade of a devoted husband and father, playing board games with Ava and discussing school projects. By night, he quietly began to gather clues, piecing together the puzzle that was Julie's new behavior. He couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully constructed life was about to collapse, and when it did, Ethan vowed, he would be ready to face the rubble. The days stretched into weeks, and Ethan's suspicions gnawed at him like rust-corroding steel. His work as a structural engineer taught him the importance of sound foundations, but now he was realizing that trust, once a sturdy pillar in his marriage, was buckling under the weight of unspoken truths. He began noticing more anomalies. Julie's laughter had changed, it came easier, brighter, but never when she was with him. Her yoga sessions turned into overnight wellness retreats, complete with vague explanations and forced smiles. Ava, with the intuition of a child too young to understand but old enough to sense something was wrong, began asking questions that Ethan struggled to answer. "Why is Mommy always gone, Daddy? Doesn't she like us anymore?" Each time, Ethan reassured her with a kiss on the forehead and a promise. "Mommy loves us, sweetheart. She's just busy. That's all." But deep down, Ethan wasn't so sure anymore. One Saturday afternoon, Julie announced she'd be heading out for another yoga session. Ethan nodded, his face a practiced mask of indifference, but the knot in his chest tightened. As she left, the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. He watched her car disappear down the street, his mind racing with questions and doubts. Then, as if compelled by an invisible force, Ethan grabbed his own keys and followed. He stayed several cars behind, careful to maintain enough distance so Julie wouldn't notice. Her route was circuitous, taking her through unfamiliar neighborhoods until she finally pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel on the outskirts of town. Ethan parked across the street, his breath shallow as he watched her get out of the car, smoothing her skirt and glancing at her reflection in the car window. This wasn't yoga. Julie walked briskly to the entrance, where a man in a gray blazer and jeans was waiting. Ethan's blood ran cold as the man greeted her with a kiss, on the lips, not the cheek. Their embrace was intimate, their body language unmistakable. Ethan's stomach churned as he watched the man take Julie's hand and lead her inside. He sat frozen in his car, his mind a whirlwind of rage, betrayal, and confusion. Part of him wanted to storm into the hotel and confront them right then and there, to demand answers, to shatter whatever illusion they were living. But another part of him, colder, more calculating, urged restraint. He needed proof, not just for himself, but for Ava. If their marriage was truly crumbling, he couldn't afford to act impulsively. Ethan pulled out his phone and snapped a few photos of Julie and the man. His hands trembled as he captured the evidence, but the weight of what he was doing settled over him like a heavy fog. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. This was real. He stayed parked across the street for nearly 2 hours, watching the revolving doors of the hotel as other guests came and went. Finally, Julie emerged, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly tousled. She looked around briefly, as though checking for prying eyes, before getting back into her car and driving away. Ethan followed her home, careful to stay out of sight. When he arrived, Julie was already in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. She greeted him with a bright smile, as though she hadn't just returned from a clandestine rendezvous. "Hey, you're home early. How was your day?" Ethan forced a smile. "Fine. Busy as always." The evening passed in a haze of small talk and forced normalcy. Julie acted like everything was perfectly ordinary, but to Ethan, her every word and gesture felt like a lie. That night, as they lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind churning with possibilities. Was this a one-time mistake, or had this been going on for months? Did she still love him, or had she already moved on in her heart? And most importantly, what was he going to do about it? The next day, Ethan made a decision. He contacted a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Marla who had a reputation for discretion and results. When they met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, Ethan laid everything out, the changes in Julie's behavior, the hotel, the man. Marla listened intently, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. "You're looking for confirmation," she said when he finished. "But I need to know what you want to do with that confirmation. Are you planning to confront her? File for divorce?" Ethan hesitated. The word divorce felt heavy on his tongue, like an inevitability he wasn't ready to face. "I just need the truth," he said finally. "Whatever that truth is." Marla nodded. "I'll get you the truth. But be prepared, it might not be the truth you want." Over the next week, Marla kept Ethan updated with cryptic text messages and brief phone calls. Each update painted a clearer picture of Julie's double life. She wasn't just seeing the man from the hotel, she'd been meeting him regularly for months. They exchanged flirty texts and rendezvoused at various locations across the city. And then, the final blow, Julie was pregnant. Marla's report included everything: time-stamped photos, screenshots of messages, even a video of Julie and the man sharing a tender moment in a park. Ethan stared at the evidence, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him, leaving him suspended in a void of betrayal and despair. The confrontation came 2 days later. Ethan sat at the dining room table, the manila envelope of evidence in front of him, as Julie walked in from another yoga class. She looked startled to see him sitting there, his expression unreadable. "Ethan? What's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. "Sit down," he said, his tone calm but firm. "We need to talk." Julie hesitated, her eyes darting to the envelope on the table. She sat down slowly, her hands folded in her lap. "What's this about?" Ethan slid the envelope across the table. "Open it." Julie's hands shook as she opened the envelope and began pulling out the contents. Her face paled as she looked at the photos, the texts, the evidence of her affair. When she reached the pregnancy confirmation, her breath hitched. "Ethan, I can explain," she started, but he held up a hand to silence her. "Don't," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I don't want your excuses, Julie. I want the truth. How long has this been going on? And whose child is it?" Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, her mask of composure crumbling. The weight of the silence pressed between them until she finally broke. "I got pregnant after a revenge affair because I thought you were cheating on me," she admitted, her voice trembling. "That guy, he dropped the protection because he was embarrassed." Ethan's breath left him in a rush, as though the words had punched the air from his lungs. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening. "You thought I was cheating on you," he repeated, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "So your solution was to betray me first?" And then, his voice caught, shaking with fury and disbelief. "And then you let him get you pregnant?" Julie's face crumpled as her tears flowed freely now. "I thought you didn't love me anymore," she sobbed. "I thought you were with someone else, Ethan. I didn't know what to do." Ethan pushed back from the table, rising slowly. The calmness in his movements belied the storm raging inside him. He looked down at Julie, his gaze as cold as steel. "I wish you all the best," he said, his tone sharp and final, "raising a child with that bastard." He paused for a heartbeat, letting the words sink in. Then, with a contemptuous glare, he delivered the final blow. "Goodbye, you viper." Julie's sobs turned into a strangled gasp, but Ethan didn't wait to hear what she had to say next. He turned and walked upstairs, each step deliberate. He grabbed the suitcase he had packed earlier and slung it over his shoulder. As he descended, Julie stood frozen in the kitchen, her cries echoing in the silent house. Ethan stepped out the front door, the night air hitting him like a rush of clarity. For the first time in weeks, he felt the suffocating weight of doubt and betrayal lift slightly. But as he drove away, his jaw clenched and his mind churned. Freedom came at a price, and Ethan knew he would have to face it, one painful step at a time. The sound of the engine hummed steadily as Ethan drove into the night, his grip on the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. The house he had called home, the life he had poured himself into for over a decade, was now a stranger's domain. Julie's tearful face flashed in his mind, her desperate words looping like a haunting refrain, "I got pregnant after a revenge affair because I thought you were cheating on me." He shook his head, trying to expel the memory, but it clung to him like the weight of wet clothes. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless, yet every mile away from her felt like a balm to his searing anger. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, but he ignored it. He knew who it would be. He couldn't stomach hearing her voice again. When he finally stopped, it was in front of a modest motel on the outskirts of town. The vacancy sign flickered against the darkened highway, and the lone receptionist barely glanced up as Ethan signed the check-in sheet. The room was sparse, just a bed, a chair, and a television mounted on the wall, but it suited him fine. He tossed his suitcase onto the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing in particular. For a long while, he sat in silence, his thoughts storming. Memories flooded back, Julie's laughter on their first date, her radiant smile on their wedding day, the way her hand used to fit so perfectly in his. He remembered the early years, when they would stay up late dreaming about their future, making promises to always be each other's safe haven. Where did it go so wrong? The answer came as a bitter realization: she had allowed doubt and pride to destroy everything they had built together. And the man she betrayed him with, the guy she spoke about so casually, hadn't just been a fling. He had left his mark on their lives in the form of a child. Ethan clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as he thought of the man's audacity and Julie's choice to lie instead of confide in him. By morning, Ethan had resolved to take action. He wasn't the type to wallow, his analytical mind demanded solutions, plans, outcomes. He needed answers, not just for himself, but to ensure Ava's future remained secure amidst the chaos. After a quick shower, he picked up his phone, scrolling past Julie's missed calls and messages until he found the number of the private investigator, Marla. "Marla, it's Ethan Holloway," he said when she answered. "I need you to dig deeper." Marla's tone was as professional as ever. "What are we looking for?" "Everything you can find on Julie's lover," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the tumult inside him. "Where he works, who he is, and how long this has been going on." "I'll get right on it," Marla said. "But Ethan, this could uncover things you might not want to know." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "I'm past wanting. I need the truth." While Marla conducted her investigation, Ethan reached out to his attorney, a no-nonsense man named Greg Carson, who had helped him draft his prenuptial agreement years ago. Greg listened patiently as Ethan explained the situation, his expression unreadable. "Let me get this straight," Greg said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Your wife cheated on you, got pregnant with another man's child, and thought she could pin it on you?" Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "That's the gist of it." Greg sighed, his pen tapping against the desk. "The prenup covers your assets, so you'll be protected financially. The bigger issue will be custody. If she tries to use Ava against you." "She won't," Ethan interrupted, his voice firm. "Julie's choices have nothing to do with Ava. I won't let her drag our daughter into this." Greg gave him a measured look. "Good. Then we'll play this smart. Let me handle the legal side while you focus on staying steady. Divorce can bring out the worst in people." Ethan nodded, the weight of the conversation sinking in. Divorce. The word tasted bitter, but it was a necessary step toward reclaiming his life. A week later, Marla called with an update. "His name's Daniel West," she said. "He's a fitness trainer at the gym Julie's been going to. Single, mid-30s, no kids, until now." Ethan gritted his teeth. He could picture Daniel, all charm and bravado, the type who probably thought rules didn't apply to him. "What else?" "Well, he's got a reputation," Marla continued. "Several women have come forward with similar stories, casual flings, no intention of commitment. Apparently, he's well-versed in dodging accountability. And here's the kicker, he's been boasting to his coworkers about hooking up with a married client." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "Does he know about the pregnancy?" "From what I gathered, yes. But he's not interested in being a father. He's treating it like a joke." Ethan's anger flared white-hot, but he forced himself to stay composed. "Thank you, Marla. Keep digging. I need everything." As he hung up, a grim sense of purpose settled over him. This wasn't just about Julie anymore. Daniel West had crossed a line, and Ethan wasn't going to let him escape unscathed. That evening, Ethan parked outside the gym where Daniel worked. He waited, his heart pounding as he watched the entrance. Around 8 p.m., Daniel emerged, laughing with a coworker as they headed toward their cars. Ethan stepped out of his own vehicle, his presence immediately catching Daniel's attention. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked, his tone cocky as he sized Ethan up. "You're Daniel West," Ethan said flatly. Daniel grinned. "Yeah. Who's asking?" Ethan stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. "I'm Ethan Holloway. Julie's husband." The smile vanished from Daniel's face. He took a step back, his bravado faltering. "Look, man, I didn't know." "Save it," Ethan snapped, his voice low and cold. "I know exactly who you are and what you've done. And I'm here to make one thing clear, you've ruined my marriage, but you will not ruin my daughter's life. Stay away from her. Stay away from Julie. You don't exist to us. Understood?" Daniel stammered, his confidence crumbling under Ethan's glare. "Why yeah, sure, man. Whatever you say." Ethan leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've made your bed, West. Now lie in it. And if I ever see you near my family again, you'll regret it." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Daniel pale and visibly shaken. As Ethan drove home, a strange sense of satisfaction settled over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sliver of control returning to his life. But he knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but Ethan was ready to face whatever came next. He had lost his foundation, but he was determined to rebuild, stronger, steadier, and without the weight of betrayal dragging him down. The divorce proceedings began 3 weeks after Ethan left. The courtroom felt sterile and cold, with its mahogany benches and stern-faced judge presiding over what Ethan once thought would be unimaginable. Julie sat on the opposite side, her posture tense, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. Despite everything, she looked fragile, a pale shadow of the woman he had once loved. Ethan felt no satisfaction in seeing her this way. The anger that had consumed him for weeks had settled into something calmer, though no less resolute. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about closure. The legal battle was surprisingly swift. Julie didn't contest the terms laid out by Ethan's lawyer. She surrendered her claim to the house, accepting a modest settlement instead. But the fight over Ava was where Julie tried to hold her ground. "She's my daughter," Julie said during one heated negotiation session. "Whatever mistakes I've made, that doesn't change the fact that I love her." Ethan's voice was steady as he replied, "And I love her too. But she needs stability, Julie, not a home torn apart by lies and mistrust." In the end, they reached a compromise, joint custody, with Ava spending weekdays with Ethan and weekends with Julie. It wasn't ideal, but Ethan knew it was the best option for Ava's sake. The hardest part came the day Ethan had to explain everything to Ava. They sat on the edge of her bed, her favorite stuffed dragon clutched tightly in her small hands. "Is it because of me?" she asked, her voice small and trembling. "Is that why you and Mommy can't live together anymore?" Ethan's heart shattered. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "No, sweetheart. This has nothing to do with you. Your mom and I we made mistakes. But none of it is your fault. We both love you more than anything in the world, and that will never change. Promise?" Ava whispered, looking up at him with tearful eyes. "I promise," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan began to rebuild his life. The house, once filled with painful memories, became a place of renewal. He repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and started planting a garden in the backyard, a project he and Ava worked on together during their weekends. He returned to work with a focus that surprised even his colleagues, taking on new projects and excelling in ways he hadn't in years. His friends rallied around him, pulling him out for dinners and hiking trips, refusing to let him isolate himself in his grief. Slowly but surely, Ethan began to feel like himself again. Julie's life took a different turn. She moved into a small apartment across town, balancing her time between raising the baby, Daniel's child, and her weekends with Ava. Despite their shared history, Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for her. She looked worn down, as though the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. One day, after exchanging Ava during a custody handoff, Julie stopped him as he turned to leave. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know." Ethan looked at her, searching for the anger he once felt. It wasn't there. Instead, he saw a woman who had made mistakes, just like anyone else. He nodded, offering her a small but genuine smile. "I appreciate that, Julie. Take care of yourself." And with that, he walked away, leaving the past where it belonged. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan stood in the backyard with Ava, watching as she proudly showed off the first pumpkin from their garden. "Can we carve it for Halloween?" she asked excitedly. "Of course," Ethan said, ruffling her hair. "We'll make the best jack-o'-lantern in the neighborhood." As he looked at his daughter, her face glowing with happiness, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. The storm had passed, and though the scars remained, he was stronger for it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The viper was gone, the betrayal buried. And Ethan Holloway was finally free. What would you have done in Ethan's shoes? Could you ever forgive such betrayal, or is walking away the only choice? Share your thoughts below.